Let's start with a sound. Not a score line, not a stat. A sound. A noise so thunderous, so relentless, so weaponized that it has driven Olympic gold medalists to the brink, made a four-time Grand Slam champion feel like she was playing the world number one for the very first time, forced a chair umpire at the Australian Open to stop a match dead in its tracks, and triggered a firestorm of demands from former world number ones who say the WTA has looked the other way for far too long. Aryna Sabalenka's grunt is not just a grunt. It never was. And right now, as the Miami Open rolls into full swing at Hard Rock Stadium, the most controversial sound in women's tennis is once again at the center of everything. Because Eala, the Filipina phenomenon who is taking the entire sport hostage with her brilliance, is on a collision course with the player who generates it. This story starts with a sound, but it doesn't end there, not even close. You want to understand what Aryna Sabalenka brings to a tennis court? Start with the numbers. Through early 2026, Sabalenka had built a 14-1 record for the year, with a serve sitting at 75% efficiency, pumping 8 aces against 0 double faults in a single match alone. She is the undisputed world number one. She is the defending Miami Open champion. She has reached 4 consecutive Australian Open finals. She has won 4 Grand Slam titles since 2023. The resume alone would place her among the greatest players of her generation. But there has always been a companion to that brilliance, a co-pilot that rides shotgun on every point she plays. That grunt, that earth-shaking, rhythm-disrupting, mind-bending vocalization that has trailed her like a shadow since she first broke through on tour. For years, the tennis establishment looked past it, called it part of her game, said players at this level should tune it out. Then 2025 happened, then 2026 happened. And suddenly, nobody is tuning it out anymore. Cast your mind back to the 2025 French Open, Roland Garros, the red clay cathedral where the game's most dramatic stories get written in full. Qin Wenzheng, the reigning Olympic gold medalist, walked off court Philippe Chatrier after a quarterfinal loss to Sabalenka and went straight to the microphone with something to say. She didn't talk about Sabalenka's power or her footwork or her serve. She talked about the grunting, and what she said shook the tennis world. Zheng looked directly at the cameras and asked out loud, "How can you scream when you hit the ball, but still be screaming when I hit the ball?" She called it hindrance. She said the rule needed to change. And then she delivered the line that went viral across every tennis platform on the internet. If nothing is done, she would start screaming back the next time they played. That is not the kind of thing an Olympic champion says casually. That is the kind of thing that gets said when someone has been carrying frustration for a long time, and the press conference finally gives it a door to walk through. Zheng was not alone. At Wimbledon in 2025, Sabalenka's grunt was so loud that broadcast graphics compared it to a car horn or a lion's roar. Sabalenka herself admitted she doesn't even hear herself when she is playing. Think about that for a moment. The player generating the noise cannot even register it. But the player across the net, they register every single decibel. And the debate didn't stay on the court. It moved into living rooms, podcasts, press boxes, and locker rooms. Former Australian Open champion Caroline Wozniacki proposed a formal rule change, calling for a decibel limit to be written into the WTA rulebook so that no player could grunt above a certain threshold. This was not some fringe voice. This was a former world number one, a Grand Slam champion, a player who competed at the highest level for over a decade. Wozniacki explained her reasoning clearly. You cannot hear the ball being struck properly when someone is screaming that loud, and she believes it genuinely disturbs the opponent in ways that go beyond normal competitive intensity. She added that the younger generation of players deserves to start their careers in an environment where these habits are checked early. The WTA, for its part, stayed quiet. The tour has implemented a decibel cap. The hindrance rule exists on paper, but meaningful enforcement has been another matter entirely. That silence, that institutional hesitation, is what made what happened in Melbourne in January 2026 so absolutely explosive. The Australian Open, Rod Laver Arena, Sabalenka versus Alina Svitolina in the semifinals, and Sabalenka is cruising, dominant, methodical. Then it happens, something that, according to the world number one herself, had never happened to her before in her entire professional career. Chair umpire Louise Engzel stops the point mid-rally and calls a hindrance on Sabalenka. Not for her power, not for a racket toss, not for language. For her grunt. For the sound she made after striking the ball. The arena goes still. Sabalenka's jaw drops. She marches to the umpire's chair with the energy of someone who cannot believe what she has just been told. She requests a video review, eager to see the evidence with her own eyes. The chair umpire explains the situation in detail. Sabalenka's vocalization during the point was unlike her usual rhythm. It was a different grunt, a changed sound that disrupted the flow of play. And then comes the line that burned itself into the memory of every tennis fan who heard it. The umpire told Sabalenka directly, "You went, I-Y-a. You don't make the normal sound. You don't make the normal sound." 6 words that rewrote the conversation. Because in those 6 words, a chair umpire sitting in the biggest stadium in Australian tennis had essentially acknowledged what Jung had said at Roland Garros, what Wozniacki had said publicly, what fans had been saying for years. There is a version of this grunt that goes beyond breathing rhythm. There is a version that crosses a line. The rule that governs this situation is clear. ITF Rule 26 states that a player can be penalized for hindrance if they deliberately or inadvertently interfere with their opponent's ability to play a shot, and that interference can be physical or auditory. In the Sabalenka case, the umpire judged that the prolonged vocalization during the ball's flight interfered with Svitolina's ability to prepare for the return. The key detail: it was not the volume, but the duration and the context. A short grunt at ball impact is generally permitted. A sound that extends while the ball is still in motion, especially on a slower floating shot where the opponent has more time to notice it, enters different territory entirely. Sabalenka lost the review. The point stood in Svitolina's favor. And then Sabalenka did something that told you everything about who she is as a competitor. She went right back to the baseline and absolutely destroyed the rest of the match. She finished with 19 winners, broke Svitolina immediately after the incident, and never relinquished control again, wrapping up the match in 76 dominant minutes. She didn't crumble. She didn't pout. She channeled the anger into rocket fuel and burned everything in her path. That is the terrifying thing about Sabalenka. Even her controversies seem to make her better. But the controversy was only beginning, because what happened inside Rod Laver Arena was just the spark. Social media was the gasoline. Tennis fans divided sharply over the hindrance call, with some calling it ridiculous and others defending the umpire and calling it long overdue, noting that Sabalenka's grunts can and do disrupt opponents. The debate raged for days. Clips circulated, slow-motion replays got picked apart frame by frame, former players weighed in, current players were asked for their takes in press conferences across the next several weeks. The story would not die. And then, as if on cue, the tour arrived at Indian Wells, and Naomi Osaka walked into Stadium 1 to face the world #1 for just the second time in 8 years. What followed was a masterclass in exactly what the grunt debate is really about. Osaka lost the match 6-2, 6-4, and sat down in the press conference afterward to give her assessment. She said it felt like playing Sabalenka for the very first time, despite having faced her before, back at the 2018 US Open. And then she described, in her own words, the exact mechanism that makes Sabalenka's game so disorienting for opponents who haven't recently had time to recalibrate against her. Osaka said she found herself flat-footed at times because she expected the ball to be coming harder than it was. Then she paused, smiled, and said something that stopped every tennis journalist in that room cold. She said, "She grunts the same way for every ball." Then she added, "Oh my God, she tricked me. She tricked her, a 4-time Grand Slam champion, a former world #1, a player with decades of professional experience at the absolute pinnacle of the sport. Tricked by the grunt." Because the grunt is uniform, relentless, and constant, regardless of how hard the ball is actually being hit. And when the grunt no longer matches the pace of the incoming shot, the opponent's brain misfires. It expects one thing and gets another. A fraction of a second of hesitation, a slightly late reaction, a weight shift that was wrong before it even started. In a sport where points are decided by centimeters and milliseconds, that is not a small thing. Sabalenka herself said afterward that she was consciously varying the heights and speeds of her shots, changing the rhythm, making sure the ball came back on Osaka's side at different paces. The grunt, then, becomes the constant in a deliberately variable equation. Every ball sounds the same, but every ball isn't the same. That gap between what you hear and what you get is where matches are won and lost. Now take all of that and point it toward Miami. Point it toward Hard Rock Stadium. Point it toward the player who has captivated the Filipino diaspora, given a nation goosebumps, and climbed into the top 30 of the WTA rankings on the back of sheer, glorious first-strike tennis. Alex Eala enters the 2026 Miami Open not as a wildcard story, but as a seeded mainstay. Her semifinal run here 12 months ago, where she beat Jelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, and Iga Swiatek before falling to Jessica Pegula, netted 390 ranking points, the biggest single tournament haul of her career, launching her into the top 100 and accelerating a rise that now sees her at a career-high world number 29. She is defending those 390 points right now, this week, in this tournament. The pressure of that reality is something that separates genuine contenders from players who got hot for a fortnight. Early signs from her 2026 campaign suggest real growth. Her serve has shown better placement and variation, earning more free points. Her rally tolerance has improved, particularly in extended cross-court exchanges. She is more selective with her shot making, picking the right moments to pull the trigger rather than forcing winners on her own timeline. This is not the same player who shocked the world last spring. This is a more complete, more dangerous, and more composed version of that player. Her opening match at this year's Miami Open against Laura Siegemund went 3 hours of physical, mental, and emotional warfare before she prevailed 6-7, 6-3, 6-3. She came out firing, built a 3-0 lead, saw the momentum shift, and had to fight through a first-set tiebreak loss before finding her level and closing the match out with authority. That is not an easy win. Siegemund is a seasoned professional with years of Grand Slam experience. And Eala went toe-to-toe with her for 3 hours in Florida humidity and walked away standing. She then dispatched Ostapenko, followed by Madison Keys, and then produced the moment that stopped the entire tennis world in its tracks, stunning Iga Swiatek 6-2, 7-5 in the quarterfinals. Swiatek, the 5-time French Open champion, the former world number 1 who has been the most decorated clay court player of her era, dismantled in straight sets by a 20-year-old from Manila. The draw has cracked wide open in front of Eala. And somewhere in that crack stands Aryna Sabalenka with 4 Grand Slam titles and the loudest grunt in the history of the sport. Here's what makes this so compelling. Eala has already demonstrated in public that she has studied Sabalenka closely and that she genuinely reveres what the world number 1 brings to the court. She has said that if she could steal one shot from any player on the WTA Tour, she would take Sabalenka's serve. That kind of respect is real. That kind of scouting is serious. But admiring a weapon in the abstract and facing it across the net in a WTA 1000 final are 2 completely different propositions. Osaka watched Sabalenka on television for years and thought she was prepared. She was not. Jung had beaten Sabalenka just weeks before their Roland Garros meeting and still found herself raising the hindrance question afterward. Svitolina had a chair umpire intervene on her behalf at the Australian Open and still lost in straight sets. The grunt, the power, the psychological weight of who Sabalenka is, those things don't shrink when the moment is big. They grow. But here is the equally powerful counter-argument, and it is the reason this potential matchup has the entire tennis world holding its breath. Eala is not like those players in one crucial respect. She is 20 years old. She has no scar tissue from years of absorbing losses against Sabalenka. She carries no accumulated defeat into that stadium. She walks in with fresh legs, a fearless mentality, and a game built precisely around aggressive, first-strike tennis that can short-circuit an opponent's rhythm before that opponent ever gets a chance to impose their own game. The whole strategic philosophy behind Eala's play, serve +1, take the ball early, compress the point, force decisions before the other player is ready, is in direct theoretical conflict with the psychological leverage Sabalenka's grunt provides. The grunt works best when rallies extend, When the opponent has to wait, recalibrate, absorb ball after ball while that sound washes over them point after point after point. Against a player who ends points in 3 shots, who takes the ball on the rise and refuses to let rallies breathe, that equation shifts in ways nobody has fully tested yet. And do not underestimate the cultural dimension of this moment. When Eala steps onto any court at Hard Rock Stadium, she does not step on alone. She carries with her a nation of 110 million people. She carries the Filipino diaspora spread across every continent on Earth, their faces pressed to screens in living rooms from Manila to Los Angeles to Dubai to London. Every match she plays turns ordinary tennis into something that feels like a national event, a collective exhale, or a collective roar. That energy is not nothing. That crowd presence, that wall of noise and love directed at a single player, is a variable that cannot be measured in any statistic. Even Sabalenka, who plays with the comfort of a champion defending her territory, has to feel it, has to sense the weight of what is on the other side of the net when Eala walks out. The arena shifts, the mathematics change, the tournament becomes something else entirely. What happens next is the question that nobody in tennis can stop asking. If Sabalenka advances through her half of the draw, and based on everything she has shown in 2026, there is every reason to believe she will, and if Eala continues this extraordinary run of form through her remaining matches, then we arrive at a moment that the sport has been quietly building toward for the better part of a year. 2 players standing at opposite ends of a baseline at Hard Rock Stadium. One with 4 Grand Slam titles, a controversial grunt, and the cold eyes of a champion who has seen every version of pressure and survived it all. The other with a nation behind her, a ranking that says top 30, a game that says top 5 in waiting, and absolutely nothing to fear. And the moment the warm-up ends and the first point begins, everyone in that stadium, everyone watching from home, everyone who has followed this story from Roland Garros to Wimbledon to Melbourne to Indian Wells to right here in Miami, will be listening for one thing before they listen for anything else. They will be listening for the grunt. Will it trick her? Will it disrupt her? Will it trigger another chair umpire intervention, another social media firestorm, another press conference quote that ricochets around the world? Or will 20-year-old Eala, with her serve and volley sharpness and her refusal to accept the limits that the tennis establishment quietly assigned to her, stand in there and take the ball early enough that the grunt never gets its moment? That is the story. That is the question. That is the reason this Miami Open, regardless of everything else happening inside the draw, feels like it is building towards something historic. Tennis has been waiting for a rivalry to replace the ones that defined the last generation. It has been searching for the kind of match that makes casual fans stop scrolling and lean in. It may have found it, and the sound that announces its arrival may not be a roar from the crowd or the crack of a perfect forehand winner. It may be a grunt, loud, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Tell us what you think right now. Can Eala handle what Aryna Sabalenka brings? Does the grunt give Sabalenka an unfair edge, or is it just part of what makes her the best player in the world? Drop your answer in the comments below, because this conversation is one of the most important ones tennis is having right now, and your voice belongs in it. If this story had you locked in from the first second, hit that like button right now. It takes one tap, and it means everything for this channel. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. We are covering every single match, every development, every storyline from the Miami Open and beyond, because the most exciting era in women's tennis is happening right now, and court era tennis is right here in the middle of it. Subscribe, hit the bell, and we will see you on the next one.